I want today to lift the veil and pull back the layers on some of the historical context or systems driving beauty burnout. So when we think of social standards, ideals, social hierarchy, one thing I thought was like really interesting as I was like even pulling back the layers and unpacking all of this is the glamorization of certain things. So, there's like the Hollywood era, or there's just like really when you take anything and glamorize it, what that sort of does and how it can become about like power and status, and beauty gets all wrapped up in that. And so I feel like that's probably going to take us for through a pretty juicy conversation. Just those things. Anything that you would want to add to chat about today?
No, I'm happy to just get into it, like the evolution of how we've arrived at this like late stage capitalist version of constructed beauty. And also excited to talk a little bit about like some of like the reasons behind certain standards or like the societal shifts that facilitated certain beauty standards. Because I
Mm,
think that that's something that is so like regardless of what time period you're talking about or whatever, right? You have to dig a couple layers down to really understand why something became a beauty standard, you know?
yes. Okay, let's actually start there. What's like the most interesting one that comes to mind for you? Like, I know when we were going through our box, well, your box, it feels like our box since it's basically
It's
like
our box.
my
It's
box
it's
too.
our box.
For
It's our
context, it's like
collective life in that
Lisa's
box.
childhood, like, memories, but it's basically our box because I'm somehow in every single thing that's in there except for maybe actually, no, I can't even say except for maybe her boyfriends because I was
Because
somehow there
you're
too.
probably I was gonna say, like, other than the boyfriend makeup pictures, like, you're in all of them.
Yeah. But also I did facilitate basically 2 of your early earliest relationships, so I still
That's
feel
true.
somehow involved in that. I just realized that.
And they have the same name.
Oh my gosh, that's so weird. What
What
universe?
were you
What are you trying to
playing at?
say?
Okay, well,
Interesting. Good.
yeah. So, I mean, we just talked about this yesterday, right? But it's something that I never really thought about, but I was watching the Brooke Shields documentary, Pretty Baby, a
Mhm.
while ago. And in that documentary, at a certain point, one of the things that they talk about is the way that the perception of what an ideal woman was changed over time from the more kind of like voluptuous, like commanding, like presence of a woman who stands in her beauty or her like her physicality with power, like a Marilyn Monroe type, and how that shifted over time to be more like what we saw, I guess you could say, like starting in the 60s, but like especially 80s, 90s, this idea of like pubescent girls basically being like the ideal beauty standard, right? And so, and I'd never really thought about this, but it makes so much sense. In the documentary, they talk about how in like the 50s and before, it was quote unquote safe, let's say, for men to appreciate those things about a woman because they still controlled her. They still
Mm.
couldn't get, women couldn't get credit cards or mortgages or jobs or whatever
Like, they
without
didn't feel threatened
so
by
they didn't feel threatened by like the power of a woman's beauty because everything else about her life was controlled by the patriarchy. So she was allowed to have that, right?
wow,
And then
I'll have that.
I
Thanks.
know. And then as women started to enter the workplace, started to get their own money, started to be able to have rights, just basic rights, beauty narratives shifted and it was all about young, naive girls and capturing that youth, capturing that essence, I think, before it gets polluted by feminism, before it gets polluted by a
Wow.
more clear understanding of the power that women have. And I mean, we even see it today, right?
Yeah, what would that look like today? What's an example?
The way that I would describe it is like when you look at relationships with a really big age gap where a guy's 50 and he's like a Leo, like a DiCaprio, right?
Mhm,
He
mhm.
always gets older and they're always, 24 or below.
Yeah, like, just always trying to capture that. Okay,
That youth,
yeah.
right?
Mhm,
And they're like, guess what about women who are below 25? Like, their brains aren't done yet. And I, as a woman who was 24 in an age gap relationship, this is like going back a long time now, but like a 20-year age gap relationship, I can look back and say, oh yeah, like my brain wasn't done. I was not thinking clearly. I was giving him way more power than he deserved, like whatever. There's a million different
which is the
ways.
dynamic, I guess, that they're like, a lot of people are seeking where it's, "Oh, I can come in and swoop in as this wise
Yeah.
older man who has all of this, like, wisdom, and that can be used to control." Not to say that everyone's out there doing that, but it is a dynamic that is much easier to take place with that age gap, and specifically with it being younger woman under 24. 'Cause you can have an age
Totally.
gap at 60 and 80, that's way different, but,
I
like
mean, listen, like truly no shade to age gap relationships.
yeah,
I've been in many of them. It's not about that. It's about just that dynamic of older, like wiser man, young, innocent, impressionable, virginal sometimes woman
mhm,
who can be molded by a man, shaped by a man to fit his ideal of what a woman should be.
yeah,
Right. And I think that when you look at the runway, right? If we had Marilyn in the 50s and then we had Twiggy in the 60s, it's like those could not be more opposite. And they were both standards of ideal beauty. But if you take Marilyn's physical, like her physicality and like the power of all of that, and then you marry it with autonomy, that's just too scary for the patriarchy. And so we need to make women smaller, also give them other things to focus on, right? Oh, sure, like you have a job and you have money and that's great, but you're fat. You're supposed to look like this. And you don't. And we as men don't find that attractive. So, sure, go do your job, go make your money, do whatever you're going to do. But if you want to also get a husband because don't you still want
yeah.
to have kids ever?
Always changing the bar and adding something to the dynamic to make there's actually research on this, and I think it's talked about in the beauty myth where because women spend more time worrying about so many more things, like how they're coming across, how they look, needing to look or be and present a certain way, it actually impacts, intelligence and, like, ability
For
to
sure.
basically perform in a certain way because you're so overwhelmed with all of these different messages or all of these different expectations or pressures or whatever it is, and it literally has an impact to your brain, which is
Of
wild.
course. I mean, have you seen the clip of a few people sent it to me actually after I posted all that like eating disorder stuff?
Mm,
It's like a clip of Gillian Anderson, like she's an actress who was reading a letter that she wrote to herself when she was a teenager. And I don't know how she had the presence of mind as a teenager. I didn't have this presence of mind at all, but she was literally saying, "What's wrong with you? Like why do you spend so much time wrapped up in thinking about how you look and like the minute changes of your body and this and that? Go volunteer somewhere. Go expand your mind. Don't focus on this stuff. Like it's a waste of time. Stop it." And I think that's so true because
yeah.
either of us, right? Like it's easy to talk about this stuff because like we grew up together. All the time that we spent over the years thinking about like how we wished we looked versus how we do look, or we wish this was different, or how much time we spent, ironing each other's hair on the carpet in my parents'
I
bedroom.
would
Or like,
wake up early to go to your house for you to iron my hair. Now, it's hard enough to wake up, like, early enough to, like, brush my hair. I'm like, "No, I'll take that extra bit of sleep, thank you very much." Like
right. But what if our like young little developing brains were given we're given the knowledge that we could be focusing on other stuff, that we didn't need to be
yeah.
emulating what we see on TV, that America's Next Top Model isn't like the be all end all of of anything.
Yeah, totally. Like I think if the messaging that we received were different, the outcomes would be different. And that's exactly, we were talking yesterday about the manifesto where it's like the outcomes of extractive capitalism or of anything being extractive is what we're talking about right now, right? It's extracting our time, our resources, our energy. And what we want to create when we think about human care is different outcomes, which is more time, more energy, more power to actually use with what you want, like using your influence the way that is going to benefit you and further the world and further the community and all of these things versus taking it away. I actually think I'm so and I think it's interesting too, because when we think about us, we've been on this journey of talking about, being kids and going through like the messaging and how we were impacted by it. And we can dive more. And I would love for you to share more about like top model or even like your Twiggy days and stuff like that. Um, and now to see like where we are now, where it's been a constant unraveling of that conditioning, of that mindset, of that like time spent on those things. And it's not over for me anyways. Like it's still a thing that happens. It's just something I have more awareness over now that I can like interject and pivot and recognize where I'm leaking out my power to something else and wasting too much time on something that like isn't worth it in service of something that is outside of me. And when you can realize that, I think that's the key, and that's going to start to create different outcomes not just in individual lives but like collectively how we are, how we show up, and how we engage with one another, and what's important to us as an individual, as a group of friends, as a community, as a family. Like it's just, yeah, going from, I mean, I hear Bill, I have to think of his name, I'll write it in the show notes, but he talks about going from like an egocentric society to a soul-centric society. And when he said that, I was like, that just makes so much sense to me, because it's like going from this like materialistic, always need to be doing more, always need, and like, fine, materialism, like again, nothing wrong with it. It's more just about where is it coming from? Because growing up and being like a 12-year-old that is, I need every eyeliner, I need pin straight hair, I need this, that, and whatever, or I'm not going to belong, I'm not going to fit in, I'm going to be left out. That's not really regenerative. That's not really helpful. That's not really,
No, it's not
furthering
helpful.
my development.
No, but it's also, I mean, it's very human to want to fit in, right?
Exactly. And that's
I don't think
why
that
it is the
anybody.
way it is.
Well, exactly. And especially like when, I mean, we grew up in the 90s and early 2000s, right? Y2K era. And that was still very much like the old school. Kids are so much nicer now to each other, to themselves. It's just different, right? And I think that we didn't grow up with that. So fitting in really mattered a lot. And I don't know. I mean, I'm not a kid who's in school. I'm sure that there's a million challenges, but I know a lot of kids, like a lot of Gen Z kids who are adults now, but whatever, they were kids. And they're so much nicer. They're just so much nicer
Yeah.
than how kids were when we were growing up, I feel anyway. But I want to go back to something that you said because I think it's really important. You said leaking our power.
Mhm.
And I think that the word leak is so perfect because it implies this like slow escape of power, right?
Mhm.
When it's not conscious.
Subtle.
I don't
Yeah.
wake up in the morning and say, I've decided I'm going to give my power away to the mainstream beauty industry. It's being inundated by messages all the time that make me feel like I should be doing one thing and I'm not, and so then I feel guilty and whatever, and it starts that process
Well,
of.
can I share an example of that? Because you saw me go through this recently where, I mean, I've always gotten a lot of compliments on my hair. I've always had long, thick
You
hair.
have the best hair.
See, so
She
like
has the best hair, everybody. She
anything
has
I
the
say is gonna feel so silly to somebody hearing it, but I'm gonna say it because I'm sure we all experience this in some way.
100%.
I was feeling like my hair was thinning. I was like, "I feel like my hair is getting thinner, especially here, and it's driving me nuts." And I was Googling it, and then all of a sudden I came across I was getting all of these targeted ads for all of this, like, hair growth and this and that, and everything that I could buy to solve the problem. And I swear to God, I almost spent like $100,000. No, I'm kidding. But I almost spent like $1,000. I was like, I need to fix this. And it's going to be fixed through buying new hair solutions and like all these pills and blah,
Right.
blah, blah. And I was like, oh my gosh, wow, I'm leaking my power so much. I'm giving away at least an hour a day on Instagram, literally just looking at people's hair. Come on.
Like, how many of those people had extensions in? I'm just wondering.
Yeah, it's like you first of all, exactly. I don't know. I need to be discerning. I can't assume what everyone is saying is true. Because then I started looking into it and it's, oh my God, this was the worst thing ever. I lost so much hair from this. Like when you look at all
Yeah.
these like hair products. And so, anyways, I ended up like, I wasn't gonna shame myself out of being like, no, you're fine, you're not losing hair. I was like, okay, what is really beneath this? Like what is happening? Why do I feel like I'm losing hair? I was like, what are my stress levels at? Am I low in, like, certain vitamins? What has
Are you
changed in
eating
my
enough?
water? Am I eating enough? And all of those factors, came out as, yeah, my iron was low. I wasn't eating enough protein. I was probably more stressed, and my hormones were different. I'm at different parts of my cycle. But the first thing we do is to look to compare to other people. There must be something wrong with me because I once had great hair and now I'm losing it, and just,
And
like
by the way, like, her hair is still amazing.
Yeah, and I mean, like, it's just I just thought it was so interesting, and that's the leaking of power because it didn't happen overnight, it was, like, slow. I started noticing it, and then I started instantly outsourcing to everything that I saw on social media, versus coming back to myself and asking myself, "What's going on right now? Why do I think I need better hair than I have right now?" Because it was this constant comparison of, well, I wanna be that person that people like in a way, I feel like it was a part of my identity, like, I felt like I belonged through having somehow nice hair, which is
But
only
that's
because I grew up with that conditioning of thinking that's also a part of my value was my hair, because that's what I would receive compliments on. So it's like when you start to
100%.
feel like you're losing that part of you, it it's such an identity thing, and that's where you have to be careful, I think, with the leaking of power because your power is internal. It has nothing to do with what people are complimenting you on, how you fit in, what your hair looks like, what your skin looks like. That is not like your power comes from within. And the sooner we can start to shift to insource that more and have internal dialogue versus looking for that external validation, then the sooner we stop wanting to buy every solution for the wrong problem.
For sure. I mean, I think there's a couple things at play, right? So, for one, I don't think you deserve any type of shame for looking for a product to solve a problem because we've been conditioned that products solve problems.
Yeah.
That's
And maybe there's a product that I did change my shampoo because that was part of it. I was like, "You know what? I did change my shampoo, so maybe I'm gonna change it again." You know what I mean? There's still product
yeah,
involved.
but I just mean like more broadly,
Mhm.
we're taught as like a consumerist society that products solve problems. If you have a problem, you find the product
Yeah.
that provides the
First look
solution.
outside.
That's
Yeah.
how it works. And then the second thing that I think is worth talking about is that most compliments, I would argue, are really just a projection of the other person's insecurities, right? Like
Mhm.
the people who tell you you have amazing hair might be saying to themselves, "Oh, like I wish I had hair like Katrina."
Mhm.
Do you know what
Mhm.
I mean?
Like, it's
And
saying more about we take it very personally into heart, but oftentimes it's saying more about how somebody else might feel about themselves versus
exactly.
yeah.
Not that like the compliment isn't valid. I'm a big fan of compliments. I like to give
Yeah.
compliments. I think that it's just like a really nice, easy way to provide appreciation for somebody who's like in your environment. I'll always do that.
Yeah.
But often, I think it does come from a place of feeling like a place of inadequacy.
Mhm.
Oh, your
Mhm.
skin's so nice. I wish my skin was like yours. Oh, your hair is so long. I wish my hair was long like yours. When it's like, why?
And
Why do we need
maybe
to
it
make this
is.
about?
Sometimes people say that, like, "Oh, your skin is so good," or "I wish I had my skin glows like that," and I look at them and I'm like, "I think your skin is beautiful." Like, I would you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
but it's we see ourselves we are our own harshest critics, and it is nice to have that reflected back to us through other people because sometimes we can't see that in ourselves, like the beauty that's there, and at the same time my journey has been, like, getting to a place of compliments and external validation is just, like, a nice bonus on top because I'm already trying to do that for myself. And that's the power piece, right? Where we're no longer influenced by what other people say or other people's compliments. They're added bonuses and they're beautiful and they're wonderful and they're amazing. And everyone should be complimenting each other. That's a part
Yeah.
of a really healthy, I think, society and dynamic and being willing to appreciate one another. And at the same time, it's not being dependent on those for your worth or for your validation or for your power. I think it's these moments that feel so simple that are like the leaking of power. It's when all of a sudden I wake up and I'm like, I want this new outfit or I want to go get Botox or I want to do that. Again, nothing wrong with that, but like, where is it coming from? What happened that made me feel that way?
Yeah.
Versus just trying to make the discomfort go away. Am I feeling a certain way about aging? Am I feeling a certain way about, am I comparing myself to the style of others? Like, I think actually that's the thing too. It's like as soon as there's an uncomfortable emotion, we don't wanna look at it. So
Yeah,
we go to the quickest solution to fix it.
for sure.
Yeah. Sorry, that was a tangent on leaking power, but
No, but I think that it's all worth discussing.
yeah.
I would love, because I mean, you already have so much of the knowledge, but also have done some research. I would love to hear from you about maybe like the quick progression, or not it's actually been like a long and slow progression, but the journey of where we started as a humanity with beauty as a concept versus where we are now. I think that that high level like arc of beauty is inherent, beauty is purchased is something that's really
Yeah.
worth discussing. I'd love to hear from you on it.
I think so what's coming to mind is a few things. So one, you dove into it with, like, different periods of time. You can look at every historical time and see how beauty played a role in it, right? Women becoming more equal, right? All of a sudden now there's a new beauty standard. The whole housewife era and marketing, like marketing plays a big role too when advertising and marketing became a way of selling, and this is also a part of, I guess, the capitalistic sort of structure because it wasn't always that way. Before it was like, let's barter what we need and support
Yeah.
each other and stuff like that. But then once it was like, oh, we can make money off of this, we got to create some problems. So,
Yeah.
let's make every housewife feel like they need all of the new appliances. And if not, they're not good enough.
Well,
Um,
they're bad wives,
yeah,
and
they're
the
bad
worst thing
wives.
you could possibly be in a patriarchal society in the 50s is a bad wife.
Exactly. So it's like, how do we take something that is so attached to somebody's identity and make them feel like they're not doing enough around it?
Mhm.
And this is where we start to see like the use of language, fear-based messaging, it being tied to social rejection, social hierarchy. Like even we talked about on the last podcast, even like when I think about going to a meeting or going to an event, like I still feel like I'm still thinking, oh, how am I going to present myself? How am I going to look? That's because how we look and beauty, there is this pressure because it's tied to social status, right? The glamorization of beauty. And so, like, some really interesting examples that have blown my mind to learn about of how this really shows up. Maybe we can talk about those because I just think that they're so interesting. So, one example is laser hair removal.
Mhm.
Laser hair removal being basically like something that so many women do now, myself included. I was like, I'm freaking Italian and hairy as fuck, and I need to get rid of all this hair. Thanks, dad, but it's going. And like literally spent thousands and thousands of dollars to remove all of my hair. And I just thought, yeah, of course I would want to do that. I don't want like hair all over my body. And that was also the time that we grew up, right? Now it's a bit more normal, and and it's also normal in different cultures. But when I say normal, I'm saying normal relative to the time, right? It was normal to remove your hair back then, and that's still a part of
Yeah.
society.
And I
But
mean, I think that in the like where we grew up, you said Italian, right? That you're
yeah,
Italian and whatever. We grew up in a very specific kind of beauty culture where your esthetician is your best friend and you see her every 2 weeks and you go from here down, and
Like,
that's just how it is.
maintain,
Shout out
yeah,
to
your
Eleanor
look.
at Layla's Aesthetics.
Yes, oh my god. Yeah, we were there every week, every 2 weeks at least, and that's because, there's all this messaging around that you need to look that way, that's just the norm, but that we never questioned where that came from, and this is the really interesting thing. We don't think about a lot of things where they come from, like laser, deodorant, like, we don't think about these things, they're just normal. Of course we wanna smell good, of course we wanna have clean hygiene, of course we wanna look presentable, but why is it that those things are associated with looking a certain way or being a certain way? And so when you dive into laser hair removal, it was really targeted specifically to women, and that if you had hair, you were like demon like and basically not even human. There was wild. We need to find some of these ads because it's like literally wild.
When
What
are they from?
I'm,
Time.
I'm gonna Google that because another thing is it's tied to like racism and the color of your skin. So oftentimes the darker your skin was and the more hair you had, that was tied to social status. Again, wild. And basically, if you weren't removing your hair, which by the way, at this time, laser hair removal was super dangerous. Like women died from this. It wasn't just an easy procedure. Even now, you still have to be worried about burning your skin. But back then, it was like genuinely more dangerous where you could
Yeah.
die. Come on.
Or even before laser, like electrolysis. Like I remember my mom going for like electrolysis
Yeah.
and whatever. And I'm glad actually that I waited to do laser until the technology like advanced. But it's crazy to think like when these new treatments come out and everybody jumps on them. Ozempic, I think actually is a really good example of this.
1964, by the way, laser. So think about like how early that would be in relation to like where we're at now with the technology and the innovation.
Oh my god, crazy.
Yeah.
And there's still like a long way for it to go. So that's wild.
So basically, as an example of how marketing was used for women and for laser, right? Ads often would say you're unfeminine, you're undesirable, you're even dirty if you're not like if
Yeah.
you have hair. Like you need to be smooth, hairless, and that's the only acceptable standard for women. So there's again, see like that fear, shame, guilt that we talked about last week, like the marketing, it's more hidden now. I think there's still a lot of ways that comes through, but it was, like, just blatant back then, right? And that was just normal. And so another example, oh my gosh.
Oh, and sorry, can we just go back to
Yeah,
I just want to, because you said it was normal and whatever. How many women were in that room? How many women were in the advertising agency working on the ads, not providing support labor? How many women were in the room thinking up ideas or encouraging that as like as framing? That sounds like something entirely invented by a man.
yeah, exactly. And, like, also, even if you just think about the economic aspect of this, you're taking something that is essential and normal and a bodily function, like, it is normal to make it wrong in service of profit.
Yeah.
Like, this is the cycle that perpetrates consumerism, right? So, like, internalizing this shame, like, now here we are, you know, years and years later, and we still feel shame about body hair. We still feel shame about, like, when we start the scent of a natural body, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so deodorant actually was first targeted to women. Men didn't need to wear deodorant. Women are the ones that needed to smell good, and, oh my gosh, like, how could you? How dare you smell? Like, how dare you? And it
But
was normal for men.
it's how dare you exist?
Yeah,
How dare you exist in your natural state
yeah,
when you should be bending over backwards to make yourself attractive to men? And
wild.
that's something that we haven't really talked about it, but I would love to just say I've started myself as a woman who is mostly interested in men, like romantically. I have decided to decenter men from my life in the sense of really thinking about how much of what I do is about the male gaze. How much of what I do is about being attractive to men.
And that's the
As
power leakage, right? That's
right,
the
exactly.
reclaiming the you recognize the parts where you're leaking and you're like, "Wait a second, I'm the center here. Like, I'm at the center.
Yeah,
I have the power." Mhm,
yeah, this is my world.
mhm.
Why am I, like, thinking too much about this and how somebody else might perceive me? I don't actually care.
I love that.
I
That's
could care.
such a good way to think of it too. How am I putting somebody else at the center of this decision instead of myself? And I think something we have to be willing to admit or even talk about is we've learned that there's aspects about that work. And so it becomes a little bit of a manipulation, right? Where it's if you know that you can manipulate a situation in that way, then
Why wouldn't you?
yeah, so we have to be willing to go through the discomfort of actually no, I'm going to take back my power, not use it in a way that is because that's force, right? Like when we think about power versus force, power is natural, it's inherent, it's a neutral thing. When we are using power as manipulation, as force to control someone or something else outside of us, that is us giving our power away and in service to something outside of us.